All right, and it looks like we are all set to get started. So, once again, my name is Dave Howe. I'm our head of knowledge transfer at Sales for Life, and I really appreciate everyone joining us here today for our executive webinar, Adapt or Perish: Why and How to Introduce AI, Artificial Intelligence, in Your Sales Process. Here with me today, we've got a couple excellent guest speakers and a really great session to take everyone through. Really excited to have with us two individuals. First off, we've got Tim Furey, the CEO of MarketBridge. Tim, thanks very much for being with us here today.
Ready to go.
All right. And we've also got Paul Teshima, who is the CEO of Nudge. Paul, really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
All right. Well, without further ado, everyone, I know you're excited to jump into our content. So I will pass it over to our expert on the subject at this point in time. Tim, if you'd like to take it away, I believe we're all set to go.
Great. So the objective today is to sort of bridge the gap between all the hype on artificial intelligence that's out there and the reality of what you can do with a sales team. And one of our critical objectives is to try to make people realize that it's not as far off and far-fetched as people think, but that in fact you're already doing some level of artificial intelligence to support your sales team now, and we'll kind of give people a roadmap as to where it's headed and how you can accelerate the effort to improve the amount of data and analytics and decision-making capabilities that you put in the hands of not only the sales teams but also marketers. So hopefully we'll get some feedback from Merit at the end that says, hey, listen, you've demystified this and made it much more accessible for us and our team. So with that, I will just quickly, we've put a typical definition of artificial intelligence. I will tell you that when we speak inside our firm, 2 or 3 years ago, artificial intelligence was always, well, it has to be machine learning and it has to be very sophisticated algorithms and tools that make us, look like we're Siri or Alexa or Watson, or even, for those of you who are as old as I am, HAL on Space Odyssey, 2001 Space Odyssey. What we're talking about here, though, is not necessarily a mimicked human being trying to sell to somebody, but simply how do we take data and process it both instead of, but also for salespeople to come up with better decision making. And I think as I go through the presentation here, and Paul will give some comments as well, we'll see pretty clearly that in fact companies are already doing this, but what they're going to need to do to stay competitive and stay productive is expand their definition and extension of what they do in artificial intelligence. So let me start off by saying, again, we're trying to answer the same old question. If I'm a marketing and a sales team, I have a pyramid of accounts and opportunities. I've got several buyers that are in market. Obviously, many of you are out there, lots of talk about intent data and lead scoring and all that kind of stuff. So that's a form of artificial intelligence coming in to sort of say these are the people that are in market and at the top of the prospect list. And then as you go down the prospect list, you've got others that are opportunities that are soon to be in market and longer term prospects. And typically the sales teams focus on the top of the pyramid and marketing teams tend to focus on the bottom of the pyramid to drive and nurture leads. What we find in most sales organizations is if I'm a sales rep and I've got 400 buyers in my territory, I'm probably pretty good at answering these 3 questions. Who should I target? What products should I sell them? And what content should I give them for the top 5 or 10% of the opportunities I'm working right now? They usually can use some help answering those 3 questions, but I'm pretty good at managing it at the top of the pyramid because I'm actively in those deals. The question becomes is how does a salesperson and their marketing peers do this across a broader territory of 400 or 500 opportunities in market? So all we're talking about with artificial intelligence is how do we use data, how do we use analytics, how do we use tools to not only answer these questions for who are the best prospects, which products should I sell each one of them, what's the best content to advance the deal, not just for any one given prospect and for one given day, but how do I do this on a systematic basis across a complete market or sales territory that I have? And that's really what the goal we're trying to focus on. So the way we think about it, and I want to spend some time on this particular graphic, is that in many ways we've been doing this for years, and Paul, I'll ask you to comment as we go through this. But if we take a look at the left, we basically, as marketers and as salespeople, been using what I'd call a very, very simple rudimentary AI technology, and I use that in quotes, for years. We've done things like SIC code, employee size, geography, whether it's a state or a zip code, and title as simple indicators to help me answer those three questions. If I know the answer to those four variables, the industry they're in, how big the company is, where they are, what the buyer's title is, I can start to begin to rudimentary ways answer the question of which product do I sell them, who do I sell to, what product do I sell them, and what content do I advance to advance the deal. So we call that demographic rules. Very simple demographic rules, which most companies already use. And the purists wouldn't call that AI, but it's a form of AI. It's using some sort of rules to understand who you would target and how you would target them. It then goes to behavior rules. And I would argue in the last 5 years with marketing automation tools, search, social media, we've been able to now get actual behavior. So I can now see who's searching or who's intent and who's in market. I can see actual behavior. They opened an email, whether my Marketo or Eloqua system tells me somebody opened an email and they downloaded a white paper. That now is more of a behavioral rule. And typically companies have rules that says if they opened up this email or visited our website this many times, this is what we need to do. And so we've got a set of behavioral rules that around specific actions. And what I call all of these is essentially an if-then statement. So the world is divided in artificial intelligence as if A, B, and C exists, then do X, Y, and Z. So if I have an SIC code, an employee size, a geography, I do something. If I now know that somebody has opened an email, downloaded a white paper, attended an event, I do something else. So essentially all AI is a set of if-then statements and behavioral rules for salespeople. And I'm going to make this land very clearly in a second. But here's the challenge. What we've learned is that it's very easy in many cases to get demographic rules or get behavioral rules. But we've been working for a lot of large and high-growth companies who are trying to drive sales productivity. And what we're finding is the best data isn't, in fact, the demographic data or the third-party data on what events and stuff, but the best data is actually the data in the third column, which is, do I have purchase history on this person? Can I track their product usage? Can I see what customer service inquiries they've come up with, they've made recently? Increasingly, IoT data. So we have a client that's in the technology business, and they have remote devices out there, and salespeople can get signaled when a remote device fails or when a remote device gets used. And those are really powerful signals for a sales guy trying to drive a sales motion. So what we are finding increasingly is that companies have demographic rules in place that guide the salesperson. They have some behavioral rules that say, if I've done search, if I've downloaded something, that guides the salesperson. But the most valuable data is actually arming salespeople with internal data on purchase patterns, IoT usage, and things like that. And I'm going to show you in a minute how we bring that together to help companies drive sales behavior and improve sales efficiency. And we call that a combination of the human analysis that a sales guy does plus some level of machine learning. So let me stop there.
Tim,
Paul, I'm sure you have some comments. Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to just add a couple comments here, Tim. And I really love this slide and how you've indicated the sort of progression through these different data columns. I mean, from being a founding member of Eloqua, launching the first automated lead scoring way back in 2004, you know, what we saw was that an increased ability to look at more and more data as you leverage more AI and machine learning. But always the output need to be simplified so that the salespeople had direct action. And I think you bring up this great point where the richest data is in behavioral, so you require more use of AI to really simplify it in a way that's actionable for the sales organization. I think it's a great way to think of the transaction that's happened.
Yeah, and we find salespeople love to have more data. I mean, everybody wants to get more data, but then salespeople are, trying to get stuff to happen quickly, and you can't dump 40 data fields on a salesperson and say, go sift through this. And I give an example. We started off with a client recently building a system like this, and they thought it was all going to be about demographic rules and behavioral rules by linking into Eloqua, as you just mentioned, and LinkedIn, et cetera. And what we found very quickly was that all those data sources were actually replaced by 11 or 12 internal data sources, like the ones listed in the rightmost column. And rather than just dumping all that data, we had to bring it all together and say to a salesperson, the best data is product usage, all this other stuff that's on the right there, but how do we boil it down into 3 things for a salesperson? Based on all this data, here's the people you should target this week. Based on all this data, here's the product that they should be offered. And based on this data, here is the content they should be served. So you have to do more, as you just said, Paul, than just download a bunch of data. You've got to actually be very prescriptive for a salesperson. And the challenge is the best data tends to be this internal data in the right-hand column. Any other thoughts, Paul, you had in that?
No, I think that's great, and I think that one of the things that I've also noticed that's really interesting is if you think about the buyer today, the buyer no longer needs to go to the salesperson for standard product company information, and so you need to add more value by looking at the other things that are interesting insights around the buyer, what they've purchased, what their patterns are, so that when you do your outreach and do engage, you can add more than just here's what we're selling, here's the price. And I think that's been the big change that really happened over the last 10 years.
And I'll give you one more thing that we've learned, and then we'll move on to the next piece of this, is that there's a difference between top of the funnel new customer acquisition programs, and obviously that has a certain piece of your revenue. But for most companies we deal with, 90% of your revenues for 2017 are going to come from retention, cross-sell, upsell of what we'd call known prospects, existing prospects. And the challenge is a lot of software and data is heavily geared toward these things on the left, which are third-party data. But if 90% of your revenues are going to come from cross-sell, upsell, renewal, retention, that all requires this data in the rightmost column. And that's where there's real traction in artificial intelligence, because whether people want to believe it or not, again, you're getting most of your data from known prospects. And as Paul just said, those known prospects know how to find the content, and what they really need to get those guys to close is all this internal data. So that's the key of what we think is the next generation AI for salespeople.
And Tim, Dave here, if you don't mind, I'd love to just jump in for a moment. In particular, the middle section, I think, is really exciting, because in our world, we deal with so many organizations with a very wide product set. One of the big challenges for sales professionals is, of course, not being pigeonholed, not focusing on one or two that they know very well and be comfortable with, and instead really doing a holistic solution sell to the organization. And there's a number of challenges around that as to, I often hear this complaint from managers: how do I get my reps to sell all of our solutions rather than just a very small segment of them? Is there any, business intelligence tools or processes by where that type of information can currently be aggregated to say this organization already has these types of solutions, or is in the market for these types of solutions, or is that more of a kind of future prospect for AI in sales?
No, it's happening now. So the way I would describe, I think what you said was, if you think about it, Amazon does a pretty good job of that for consumers, which is people who bought this book also tended to buy these things down at the bottom. So it's basically taking data about me being on Amazon and saying, based on your profile, here's the product that might best fit you. We see that happening all the time. We're doing that for a fintech firm right now, and they're selling through many different channels as well as direct to the consumer. And they have 6 or 7 products, and you can't try to push all 6 or 7 products at once. So for every customer that comes up, there's an algorithm running in the background that says this person's most likely going to like products A and D and forget the other 4 or 5. So I think that's already happening. And we'll show you an example that we came up with in a minute, how companies are doing that. So I think all 3 questions can be answered. Who do you target, which is traditionally the realm of lead scoring? What products do you sell them, which is the best fit that you just talked about, Dave? And then the third piece is, okay, what content do I give them to drive them to the next stage of the buying cycle? So the way we think about this, and it may sound complex, but to make it simple is we take a use case. So let's assume you're trying to improve cross-sell, or you're trying to improve retention, just as a simple case. The challenge is you've got all this data that you could aggregate. And the last thing you want to do is try to aggregate thousands of pieces of data at once. But you need to be able to pick out and say, okay, how would I pull data from multiple sources? Could be from third-party sources, could be from my CRM system, it could be from interactions with my marketing automation system, and figure out how to pull that data together at the customer level and say, okay, I've got a profile of X pieces of activity from this customer, and I'm not going to dump all 40 pieces of data in front of the sales rep, but I'm going to create a profile and say, based on this person's profile and aggregated data, I'm going to tee up a salesperson with the right data and the right analysis. So we typically take a look at a lot of internal data listed there on the far left, a lot of third-party data, which could include both demographic data as well as intent signals and all that stuff. And then we also bring in marketing content. And it may sound like, you know, this is an overwhelming exercise to aggregate the data, but if you actually take a very specific use case, you can boil it down to a limited set of data that you need, a limited set of content that you need, and then we bring it over to analyze it. And we say, okay, so I've aggregated the data I need. I'm going to show you an example of this in a minute. Now I need to do 2 things. I need to answer 2 questions. Who do I target based on all that data? So I do some sort of lead scoring, buying propensity, next logical product. That's some sort of targeting algorithms, and most companies have some element of that, but they're getting better and better. And then I need some sort of messaging algorithm, which is, okay, I know who to target and I know what to sell them. Now what content do I give them? And so what we find is the hard work is actually in the aggregation, and what I'll get to in a minute, in the act. But most companies have some sort of analysis that suggests the people to target, the right product to offer them, and the right content to give them. They have some of that. But the real challenge is aggregating all that stuff to come up with better analytics and then finally acting on it. So the third step of what we do is say, okay, I've got the data aggregated. I've done some sort of analysis. That's great. But if it sits there in a management report or in a PowerPoint deck and doesn't actually get delivered into the sales team or into the marketing automation program, it doesn't do much good. So how do you take those aggregated data, how do you take that analytics and then deliver it into the workflow of a salesperson? So in most cases, we're talking about Salesforce.com. So we're talking about taking multiple sources of data, creating some very simple analytics, and then delivering it in Salesforce.com. And Paul or Dave, you guys might have some comments on how you do that in marketing programs or in management reporting, but what I was going to do in the next slide is just simply focus it on how we do that in Salesforce.com. Okay? So here's a simple example. This is a B2B company selling to small businesses, both retail and e-commerce, but they've got an inside sales organization. And what they found was they weren't cross-selling. So think of this as an office supplies company trying to sell printer cartridges, trying to sell paper, trying to sell a whole bunch of other stuff. And what they found is that they were not doing a good job at cross-selling. Their share of wallet was low, and they had some major opportunity to cross-sell. So what they did was they said, if we can do some analysis of our past purchase history of each customer and build that up as a little AI routine, we can begin to understand what products, when somebody buys X, they also tend to buy Y. And so we can make sure that we sell Y when they're buying X. So in this case, and I'll kind of give you an indicator of the industry this was in, This was a company that was selling a lot of printer cartridges. And they found out in doing a bunch of analytics that people who bought printer cartridges also tended to buy break room supplies. You would never sort of think about that as a natural pairing of product. But the fact is the office manager or the office assistant was refreshing printer cartridges, also owned break room supplies. That's paper towels and coffee and stuff like that. So they began to come up with an opportunity to understand how to identify which customers were ready to buy and how to cross-sell what are potentially totally dissimilar products but bought by the same individual. So they put a set of algorithms in place that said when they're buying this, they're going to likely buy this, and here are the people who are in market, and basically then delivered it through Salesforce.com. And so here's how to take that and how it got delivered. There was one simple screen, a tab, a window in Salesforce that said, who are the best prospects to target? So this is literally inside salespeople selling to corporations through the telephone, through a call center, and they are either through email or through phone calls targeting a certain set of prospects. And those prospects are different every day. Those prospects are different every week based on somebody downloading a white paper or a printer cartridge is running out. Literally, in some cases, Hewlett-Packard and others can send an IoT signal that says this person's running out of ink in their printer cartridge, and that can go back to a salesperson. So the first thing it did was it said, this is who you should target. Then based on that data, it said, this person, if I click into that individual, which is the second screen there, this is the best product to sell them based on what they've purchased in the past. So it identifies what product to sell them. And then the third element is, and to sell that product, here are some product spec sheets, or here's a white paper, or here's whatever, a piece of content that you can send them proactively to encourage purchase and maybe even give them an offer, a bundled offer that says if you buy these two things together, you get 10% off or whatever. So this is it could be a much more detailed example. We're not going to be able to get into it today. But it's the simplicity of saying, let's not get swamped by artificial intelligence. Let's recognize that what we're trying to do is help sales guys answer three questions. Who do I target? What products do I sell them? And what content do I give them? And so we started with saying, let's do it and make sure we deliver it in Salesforce.com and then back into it from there. So let me stop there. Dave, Paul, you might want to add some interesting comments to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think...
oh, sorry. You go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think the really great case study and a great example of how you can simplify, get the results in the workflow of the salesperson, how that can drive results. I guess one of the things I want to just add is a couple of dimensions. The first is when you go back to looking at the aggregation of data, one interesting trend that's happened in the world of CRM and AI is both Salesforce.com's large investment in a company called RelateIQ. They purchased a couple of years ago for $360 million. In relationship intelligence, and then LinkedIn, obviously being bought by Microsoft for $26 billion more recently. Do you see relationship intelligence and the data around that as being part of the mix of data that you're going to be starting to look at for some of these predictive recommendations in the future?
I'll let Paul add in. Yes, we already do it. So we already bring in LinkedIn data and data like that. Based on relationships. But that typically works from a prospecting. So it gets back to the use case. If I'm prospecting for somebody, I care a lot about relationship data. But if I've already got a prospect, I know who they are, I don't need relationship data at that point. Now I need actual purchase history data. So the way I'd answer the question is yes, we do that with several clients. We do it with our tool, our product. But then it also depends on what's the use case. If I'm trying to do acquisition, absolutely I care about relationship. But once I've got a lead, I care about other things. Anything you want to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree that relationship data is a lot of business is done through relationships, through introductions, through referrals, and certainly adds a huge value point in the prospecting side of the house, especially if you're looking at situations where you're doing account planning, territory alignment. There's some real opportunities there. I also wanted to add that, in seeing how you've the case study and integrating into the workflow, and we touched on this a bit, Tim, earlier when we were discussing it, that there is this sort of trend of bots and natural language as the, sort of the general thought around AI, and although a lot of the real values underneath that cover With startups like Troops.ai, which allows you to query Salesforce out of Slack, or People.ai that lets you look at sales productivity by analyzing everything they do in their email and phone and CRM. How do you think about that bot sort of natural language layer of AI? Is that something that you think is an opportunity to put those recommendations in that workflow of the rep, or do you think that's more of a passing fad that's coming up?
No, I think that's a big opportunity. I think you outlined it really well. Those are tools that help you do the analytics, find the data, and do the analytics. And then the challenge is, and some of those also do it, land it in the workflow. The challenge is, are those tools by themselves kind of one-off tools that do something really cool, but they don't solve the whole problem, or are they part of a larger solution? And I would argue some of those tools are fantastic, but the way to do it is to really sit down with sales reps, rather than trying to push a product on them or push a new technology on them. Get a real business case, sit down with reps, and find out what drives productivity. Because as I said, with this tech company that we've got about 3,000 AI seats going into, what we thought was the right AI going into it was not the right AI once we got into it. We found out that it wasn't about the bots, it wasn't about the text search. It was like literally, if we had these 5 pieces of data from previous transaction history, it was 95% predictive on who was going to buy and what they were going to buy. So I think those tools are fantastic and are part of the solution. But my encouragement is for people to start with what the business problem is. How do you solve the business problem as opposed to how do you buy the tool?
And then one other thing I wanted just to add, because I think that as we've talked to a lot of people in the industry, and certainly talked to a lot of different players on the AI side, I think you brought this up earlier, is that a lot of the best data is the internal data, and certainly some companies are well prepared to take that next step, and then some companies their data is not in a state that they can leverage it. How important is it to build a foundation of strong, high data quality, especially if you're dealing with the third column of internal data?
Well, the biggest thing about internal data, as everybody knows, is security. You got to have really good security protocol and all that kind of stuff, and that takes a while to build the systems and tools on that. What we find, though, is when everybody says their internal data is a mess, yes, it's probably true, but there's more internal data and there's better internal data than what most people realize. And so, yes, it's a mess, and yes, it takes work sometimes to make it clean, but a lot of it tends to be politics. People tend to hold on to data. They don't want to share the data. Our experience has been that with a little bit of elbow grease and effort, it's a little easier to get the right internal data out and in front of a sales rep than one might think. And I think we encourage people to try it as opposed to say, oh my God, our data is all messed up and we're all worried about security. And we think that it's not as hard as people make it out to be. And as we've described before, it's where the most valuable data is, particularly in the 90% of your revenue target that is upsell, cross-sell, retention.
Does
that make sense?
Absolutely.
Well, and no doubt, I also have some questions in the commentary as well. But I know we're coming towards our end time for the webinar, and I wanted to give everyone else a chance to chime in as well. Oh, sorry, did we have one more slide here as well?
No, I think we can. I think we can take questions now. I think again, we just say typically find a meaty revenue challenge, ask frontline reps what data they need, and develop a practical plan that says how do you aggregate, analyze, and build the data into the workflow. But why don't we stop there and let people ask questions?
Absolutely. So at this point in time, I'd like to open it up to the audience. If you do have any questions that you'd like Tim and or Paul and myself to field, please feel free to go to the question box within GoToWebinar, and we'll be happy to do that. In the meantime, we've got just a quick clarification from Brian. Brian has asked, just curious, what is a B2B retail company? I believe you may have used that term there, Tim.
Well, this happens to be a company, and it sounds an oxymoron. Think of it as Staples or Office Depot or somebody like that. They're essentially a retailer that has retail, but they also have B2B call centers, et cetera. So it's a little bit of an oxymoron. It's a combination of both B2B, but also has some retail presence. That's why think of it as that type of company.
Yeah, okay. And that's what I had assumed. I just didn't want to give the incorrect answer there. Also, another question, the role of the sales professional, right? How is that going to stay relevant and evolve? Because, a big part of being a sales professional is the fact that this isn't done for you. We don't have the intelligence, easily available in most organizations anyways right now to tell you what prospects you should be reaching out to, what products you should be delivering to them, and ultimately what you should be sending them to build their interest. So where does the sales professional, I guess, ultimately fit in this equation when the vast majority of what they're doing in their day to day work is being automated for them?
So my reaction is, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Dave, I think that, the Salesforce just released a report that said the number one non-selling activity a salesperson does is research. And I think that all this does is free up a salesperson's time to do more selling, more relationship building, and more trust building, which I think every salesperson is the favorite part of their job. So I don't think at all this affects the sales professional in terms of their ability to be successful. It just focuses them on the tasks that are only really can be done human to human.
Yeah, I would say two things. I think you hit one right at that. The typical time it takes in a B2B environment for somebody to research a sales call is at least 20 minutes. If you talk to most companies and you do the research, it's at least 20 minutes. Good AI can bring that research time down to under 10 minutes, maybe even under 5 minutes. So it totally cuts the research time out. But here's the other thing that I think people are missing. Most technology out there is trying to automate and repeat workflow to make volume more efficient. So if you think about what some of these call center firms are doing, all they're trying to do is make it so I can do 80 calls a day and get 5 connects, as opposed to do 40 calls a day and get 3 connects. What this is doing is saying, no, I'm not just going to sort of have dialing for dollars and automate inefficient dialing for dollars. I'm going to actually be really smart. And I'm going to say, of the 80, who are the 20 based on some sort of that I really should be contacting, and really trying to be smarter in targeting as opposed to volume. And I was talking earlier this week with a millennial or a couple of millennials that are on the inside sales organization, and they said the same thing. They don't want to be sitting there dialing for dollars all day and trying to get their 80 dials in. They'd rather have some intelligent tools that said, these are the right 15 dials, focus on them and you'll get higher yield. So I think that's where the market's headed. It's really helping sales guys get to the right prospects, not just automate dialing volume.
Right, taking the guesswork out of it. We've got a couple other great questions here. I just wanted to see if we've got time to address them quickly in the next couple minutes before finishing up. We've got one here about the size of company, right? It's easy to understand how a very large company like a Xerox or a Staples or something like that could utilize this, but the question we have from one of our participants is, how does this apply to a $4 million revenue small company selling through dealers? Is AI applicable in that type of scenario as well?
Okay, so that's two separate questions. I would argue for the smaller company, it's easier in the sense that the internal data and the politics of getting the data are probably easier to get than in a big company. So I could make the argument that small companies have an easier way of doing this. But the second piece, which is much harder, is the channel data. When the data is third-party data and out there in your channel partners, that's a lot harder data to get. So that's a different problem, and that's another webinar. Maybe we'll do that for the next webinar, and we'll talk about AI through channels. But in that case, you've got to get your channel partners to be willing to give you the data, and you've got to, both parties have to see the benefit of sharing data. And that takes a little bit more work, but maybe that's a future webinar we can do on how we can use AI through channels, because that's also doable, may not be as doable as the caller asks for a smaller company.
Right, and actually, I mean, to that point, I'm working with a partnership team in one of our programs right now, and the entire thing is geared to helping them be a better resource to their partners, to their channel, to maximize their mind share in the minds of their partners when they're ultimately selling their solution. So I could definitely see applications for AI there. We've got time for one last question here, and then we will finish up. Paul, I'm going to direct this one to you. We got a question here. An individual is interested. Where does nudge fit into this picture?
Well, Nudge is really focused around using AI to surface insights around accounts for outbound selling. And I think where the real difference is we focus a lot on understanding not only the relationships that you have that can get you access to a company, but the strength of those relationships. So unlike LinkedIn, where you would see if someone's connected, but you're not sure if they have a real relationship, we would really distill down to the 2 or 3 people that have real strong ties into that account.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Paul, or rather Tim. If you just want to change us over to our last slide there, I think we'll look to wrap everything up there. It's been an absolute pleasure having you gentlemen and all participants online with us today. Tim, thank you very much for all of your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, and Paul, it's been a pleasure as always engaging with you as well.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks, Tim.
So what I'd like to just close by doing is encourage everyone to please feel free to reach out and connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to continue a conversation with you offline. You've got our name and details up there on the screen, so please feel free to go on LinkedIn right now following today's session. Reach out to any or all of us, connect. We'd be happy to accept your connection request and continue the conversations offline. With that being said, everyone, it's been a pleasure interacting with you here today. I hope you enjoyed the session and look forward to engaging with all of you again in the near future. Bye for now, everyone.
Great.
Thank you.